Hello, welcome to our video on creating value with a relationship strategy. In this video, we'll be discussing how partner relationships can add value, thinking about how our actual thought process can help our relationship strategy. We'll also consider the major factors that shape our sales image. So, keys to a partnership relationship. How do we have some sort of partnering relationship with our customer? We need to think of three major points. First is we have to make sure that we have some sort of shared values. So we need to believe, and more importantly, the client needs to believe that we have the same ideas and values. This is really important, particularly in building trust and that buying comfort with your client. Second is being very clear on the purpose or the reason why you're together. So what is the actual vision? You and your buyer must agree on what they are trying to do together. And with these two keys, we start to recognize that instead of seeing ourselves as selling, and hopefully the buyer sees ourselves more as supporting. Okay, the role of the salesperson must move from selling to supporting. We need to actively be concerned with the growth, health, and the satisfaction to whom we are selling to. Now let's take a look at who our stakeholders are in regards to our opportunity to sell to our customers. And as you can start to see that it's not just the relationship between our customers, but there's also others involved. Now, of course, customers are important. We need to establish a working relationship that achieves support and trust with our clients. But also we need to consider our secondary decision makers. For instance, it's not just the client you need to have a good relationship, but it's also those that your client works with. For instance, during corporate events or meetings, there may be a number of attendees that can influence not only the client's decision to hold those meetings in your hotel, but also they can become new customers if you ensure a good relationship. Now we take a look at our company support staff. So remember, just because we got a sale, that's just really the beginning of a successful meeting. So there's a lot of hardworking individuals at the hotel that have to plan and execute the event. The better the relationship you have with your team, the more likely you can be confident in the success in the meeting. So remember to support your staff when you can. And finally, don't forget about your own support staff, the management personnel. It's important to have a good relationship with them as well. You never know, you might need TJ Mackey to come on a sales call and show your support. But ultimately, the bottom line is that there are many stakeholders involved in selling, especially if you want to achieve strong, long-term selling relationships. Now, one thing that we sometimes don't think about is our own thought process, or how we view ourselves. And believe it or not, this can actually help us in terms of selling. So it's really important to develop positive self-concept. Now, how do we do this? How do we develop a more positive self-concept? There's three main points. First is don't dwell on the past, focus on the future, right? It's okay to reflect and learn from your mistakes, but it's also important to always move forward. Now, another really important aspect, particularly in selling, is becoming an expert in what you're selling. So we talked about being a product, company, and a competitive expert. This also helps you build confidence. You gain expert power. And the more expert power you possess, the more positive you feel about yourself and confident. So that's really helpful. And finally, even though it might seem a little obvious, but just having a positive mental attitude is definitely going to help you have a more positive self-concept. And what you're doing right now, which is educating yourself, this is an excellent way to build self-confidence. Okay, really, there's a lot of ways to build or have a positive mental attitude. It can sometimes be more personal, but whatever it is, make sure that you're challenging yourself to something that you feel is important. This can be something like reading more books, exercising, even gaming. Whatever helps you gain confidence and have a more positive outlook can help you achieve a positive self-concept. Now, speaking of that self-concept, we want to think about having a win-win philosophy. So again, moving forward with that self-concept, we want to really focus on being somebody who's looking at it from a positive perspective, and we want a win-win outlook. And this win-win outlook can also be connected to our buyers and sellers. So we want to consider the mutual agreement between our buyer and a seller and look at it as a win-win opportunity. Now let's think about this logically. So from our point of view, let's talk about the ego. Okay, so the ego drive is motivating us as salespeople to sell, right? Ego drive is an inner force that makes a salesperson want and need to make the sale. In other words, we want to make the sale to enhance our ego. So that's our motivation. But we also need to think about the buyer or the client, okay? And this is when we just think about empathy. Now, obviously, empathy is the ability to imagine yourself in someone else's position, understand what they're feeling. Now, this is a critical tool when we're trying to make a sale, because research shows that being empathetic helps us make that sale. In fact, empathy helps you become successful whenever you're trying to satisfy the needs of others. So closing the sale provides a powerful means of enhancing the salesperson's ego. Therefore, empathy and ego drive and reinforce one another. Let's now consider adding value through different factors. In this case, we'll just discuss nonverbal factors. Nonverbal or silent messages are very critical, and I'm sure you've learned more about some of this in your BCom. So remind ourselves how important facial expression, voice tones, gestures, appearance, and posture are. These are all considered nonverbal messages. And when two people communicate, nonverbal messages convey much more of an impact than verbal messages. So let's consider a few ways that we can make a positive impact. First is remembering people's names, particularly the buyer's names. Now, how do we remember the names? There's some few tricks. First thing you can do is ask for the spelling of the name. Okay. You might also want to ask does the client want to be addressed, right? So we kind of want to avoid addressing the client by first name unless we actually ask them how they'd like to be addressed. But again, this is a great way to remember that. Maybe we can relate the name. Maybe you know somebody with the same name. That's a good way to remember their name. I would advise when you do learn their name, try and use it quickly, but also try and make sure that it's natural and frequent. Okay, so this is actually really important as well to ensure that you're being more genuine and sincere. You don't want to continue using it for no reason, but you want to use it in a natural conversation. Now, facial expressions, of course, just a reminder how important it is to look engaged and confident. As you can see, our yellow person is very confident, while other people are not quite as looking as engaged, okay? And remember, facial expressions are obviously very universal, very easy to read people's faces, and smiles are always vital. Believe it or not, even when you're wearing a mask, a smile is important. So remember that, particularly when you're doing your role plays, to make sure that you're actually engaged, and this is the way you would conduct yourself in an actual sales meeting. Speaking of nonverbal, we have to consider our appearance. Now, I'm not going to lecture you on exactly what you should be wearing. It really comes down to judgment. So these are some very good keys to think about, but again, you really have to make your own judgment here. For instance, try and have a simplicity in how you dress. Okay, you don't want to be looking overly complicated. That might be distracting. Okay, and with that, in terms of the appropriateness of the meeting is important. Okay, so it's not always important that you're wearing your best suit. It might be, if it's a meeting that's perhaps a little more casual, that's okay if that's what is expected. So remember, appropriate dress is really important. And again, you don't want to intimidate your clients as well. But again, quality, visual integrity, make sure that you are looking like you're polished, like you've put in some time. That's really important. Look, the appropriate wardrobe varies from one city or region to another and from one company to another. Particularly when you're working in hotels that are in maybe hotter climates, definitely you have to have a more appropriate dress. And you have to make sure that the customer feels safe and comfortable as well. So again, why it's important to think about appropriateness. Now, one thing we should also think about is the quality of our voice. Speed, pattern, and habits is also important. We obviously want to talk at a pace people can understand the information. Try not to be too monotone, so try and have some fluctuation in your voice. And try not to say like a lot. Think about what you're saying. And the best way to do that is just to practice, have some sort of guidelines in terms of what you want to talk about. You don't have to write down a speech so it looks robotic, but you also want to have some sort of preparation so that you don't feel like you're constantly trying to find the words that need speaking. But just think about bad speech habits and trying to avoid those. Now, etiquette is something that's, how do we say etiquette? Etiquette, think about it as your manners or your protocol. It reveals a number of ways to enhance your relationship. So you want to be respectful whenever you can. And again, etiquette shows poise, it shows confidence. It's a very unique but universal way to build a positive relationship and respect. And again, it takes a little bit of practice because we don't want to look too stiff, but we also want to look respectful. So here are some sort of key icons to remember. Think about the name. We want to make sure we're trying not to address your client by first name unless you've asked if that's okay. That's the first thing. We want to keep that type of language. Keep that with your downtime, but not during our sales meetings. Punctuation, very important. There's nothing worse than being judged for being late for a meeting, and that is a poor way to start any relationship. So remember, we want to have a positive relationship, and it's very important to respect the time of your salespeople or your buyers, anybody in part of the sales process. And finally, again, try not to be on your phone. Avoid cell phone contempt. We understand that phones are part of our communication, but particularly when you're trying to have establishing a relationship and really engage with your sales meeting, you want to make sure that you are not distracted by your phone. So I would suggest not even having it near you or on the table. Keep that hidden away so there's no distraction. So that's it for our nonverbal. Let's talk about actual verbal or conversational strategies. Now, there's an excellent book, Dale Carnegie. This is an incredibly insightful book on how to build good relationships and how to influence others, but more importantly, really how to build strong relationships. And there's some really great insight, but three sort of main focuses are: first way to do this is to search for mutual acquaintances or interests. Okay, so this is a great way to break the ice. Now, you'll notice in your role plays that you have some mutual acquaintances, and this is a great way to introduce yourself or to try to establish a new relationship with a new client. Another simple way is just making here and now observations. So having some small talk to break the ice, and also just offer some sincere compliments. They have to be sincere, and this is something people really appreciate. Maybe it's something that you might notice from that you know about them. You've learned. You also have some good information that your mutual acquaintance has provided for you. So use that as an opportunity to build that relationship through this conversation. Those are three strategies you can consider. But really, overall, it's just important to be genuinely interested in other people, be a good listener, and really encourage others to talk about themselves. And this is something you'll find very interesting, is that a lot of the top salespeople, and all the research indicates that the successful salesperson are those that get the buyers to talk about themselves more. They're doing less talking as a salesperson, and the buyers are the one doing more of the talking. So those are some great strategies to particularly apply when you're establishing your relationship. Again, some review questions and objectives. Make sure you take a look at these, review the video and chapter, and we will discuss further. Thanks for watching, and keep connecting.